So we are going to talk to Mr. Philip Edward Alexander, the leader of the Citizens Union of Trinidad and Tobago. I think he's coming on now. Mr. Alexander, are you there?
Good evening. You hearing me?
Yes, yes. We can't see you though.
You can't
You
see
need to
me?
put that video.
Let me try and get start my video.
Yeah. Right. So we are discussing the whole issue. Good evening, Mr. Alexander. You're here on the newsroom program. It's a news magazine program. You're with my co-host, Mr. Errol Fabian, and myself, Priya Bihari of ACP News. So thank you for coming up.
Good night to both of you and to all your viewers and those following on social media.
Thank you. We're talking about the refinery. You know, the second time OWTU was rejected, trying to buy the refinery, basically. I want to ask a question, you know, from a political standpoint. Some people are saying that this negotiation went after the elections last year. You know, it wasn't settled before, and it went after, and that might have been a political move by the PNM to win elections. What are your thoughts on that?
On that particular question, the answer is yes, of course it was. In fact, just before the election, if you remember, after we got the information that the government had chosen Patriotic's bid, the Minister of Finance was gushing about how perfect a bid it was for the country and for the union and for the workers to have control of the refinery, and it was such a big thing. And then in a couple of weeks, we started to hear that the government was floating the idea politically that the opposition was against workers owning the refinery, if you remember that. And that was a political gimmick. And it was all a political gimmick because I want to take you back to that acceptance of that $700 million upfront payment that was supposed to be the reason that they got it, and then they deferred it. The entire timeline of everything from Wilfred Espinet's first statement that Petrotrin had turned a corner and it was now profitable. 3 months later, Franklin Cann told the nation Petrotrin is going to destroy Trinidad and Tobago and pull down the economy. We now got clarity on that. There were studies done that were not in keeping with the government's narrative, and those studies weren't released to the public. Then Petrotrin was put out for sale. We were told 77 bids came in, only 25 made sense, 8 went forward. Of the 8, the government chose Patriotic because of the upfront payment, and that it was the only bid that came with an upfront payment, so they were awarded. And then we were told again at budget time that the government has decided to defer the upfront payment. Now, if you gave somebody the win on a tender because of an upfront payment, how do you then defer that? That was the biggest and most glaring underhanded piece of machinations I have ever witnessed. And it was supposed to be challenged by every other bidder.
Do you think that maybe, you know, OWTU was out of its league, you know, trying to get so much of money and trying to invest in such a big asset?
I have 2 questions from the moment this whole Petrotrin thing blew up in our face. One, the only people who did not have a say in all of it were the actual owners of Petrotrin, us. We, the people of Trinidad and Tobago, we were never consulted. We were never given a chance to have say what we want done. The government and the union made their deals. The second question I wanted to ask was this: if the OWTU was running the refinery, the workers were not happy, what were they to do?
That is why I asked the question, because you have a trade union that is pro-labor, that is, you know, their whole philosophy, you know, is against big business then, and they are getting involved in. Shouldn't that have been an issue at the beginning? you think, before this took place?
I do not think that the OWTU had the wherewithal to run the refinery. I still do not think they do. They can operate the refinery. Being able to fly a plane and be a mechanic on a plane and run an airline, two different things. Being able to run an oil company is a different thing than operating the machinery. But it is too easy to dangle nonsense for Trinidadians and fool them with it. So it's naming the thing patriotic. Saying that in all the nonsense that they wanted to sell you, I told Trinidad and Tobago then, OWTU is not going to end up with this refinery. That all of this is gimmicks for politics, but there is a preferred buyer waiting in the wings, and that is what is going to happen. The government.
Well, that is what Mr. Roger, alluded to today at the press conference. He was saying that based on the letter he received, there seemed to be, and I think he used the word, some sort of backdoor deal, and it was made clear that somebody, that the government, the refinery, but there's no evidence of that at this point in time. So, but the question remains: we have an asset there that, and we just had the former Minister of Energy. He was saying that it is like a car. You have a car that hasn't started for 2.5 years, well, 2 or 3 months. How you're going to get it going again? There are certain things that has to be done, and then we reach a stage now. Do you think that it is feasible? But then what we'll do with all of those
the next thing we know, there'll be a fire sale.
So
a fire sale is the next thing we know that is happening with that asset that belongs to the people of Trinidad and Tobago, because it's going to start a rot and then they'll sell it out here, there, and everywhere for pennies. They have stolen an asset from the people of Trinidad and Tobago, and there's nothing they could do, it appears, to salvage that.
Errol, you're spot on. And this is a game that has been played time and time again. You use public funds to buy a gas to liquids technology for 13.5 billion, and then you say and then you sell it to Nickman for $13.5 billion for. What did Nickman pay $25 million for? This is the reality. I have watched it where friends of government has appealed to government for bailouts, government bailout, and then government sell the asset that they bailed out for less money than they used to bail it out. We've been hoodwinked by this style of management for it is opportunity to discuss these things rationally as a nation. Everything comes down to politics, cheap and dirty politics, and we lose sight of what we're talking about. Guyana has an estimated $5.5 billion of oil to refine. We have a refinery with 140 telling me that we didn't do a joint venture agreement with Guyana that has no refinery early in the game to justify keeping that refinery up and running.
Just to point out, Mr. Alexander, and I was at the press conference today and actually asked the question if the government therefore would get involved in the refinery, and it was a vehement no, that they are not looking to go back in the refinery, because the other aspects of Petrotrin, that is, like exploration and production and Paria, they are making profits, right? So therefore the refinery is an issue. In other words, it is not feasible. So I think it is an economic decision that the government will not get into.
Who owns Paria? Who owns Heritage? Where do those profits go?
Well,
where do they go? Who owns those things? Who owns Augustus Long Hospital? Who owns thousands of acres of land that Petrotrin had?
So
who owns the idle asset?
Yeah. So your point is what, Mr. Alexander? What's the point you're making?
That this is coming across as a shakedown. That what Errol is, that this was an asset that was stolen from the people. This was a massive asset that was stolen from the people. And what we're talking about, Chotrin, nobody's talking about heritage, nobody's talking about Paria, nobody's talking about Augustus Long Hospital, nobody's talking about the rest of the assets and the land and all of the stuff that Petrotrin had that made up Petrotrin. Nobody gave us a complete accounting and audited version of this is what Petrotrin is. They broke it up, they sold what they needed to sell, and the issue is now Petrotrin. These are $1 billion to start. What Wilfred Espinay and Ansel Rocher agreed on was that Petrotrin was top heavy. It had hundreds of people in top management positions, drawing.
This was 50%. 50% of that was in salaries alone. That is what the minister when he said today. Okay, so that
if you cast your mind back to ArcelorMittal, when they took ISPAT, all they did was fire the management. You know, they fired the management and operated that factory to a profit that made Mittal one of the wealthiest men in the world.
Mr. Alexander, thank you very much. We are out of time. I want to thank you. Pleasure.
It was my pleasure. Thanks a lot for having me.
Good night. Pleasure. Okay, Errol, that's it.
Thanks a lot for joining us, my friends.
We'll have another edition.
We've done what we can to get this newsroom going.